Is Spider-Man 2 as great as we remember? Today, that's a question I'm hoping to answer by going back to this movie for the first time ever since I was a kid, giving it another look, and reviewing it. Of course, I already reviewed the first film, so if you haven't seen that one yet, you can check that out first. Either way though, let's jump right into it. The first thing I need to discuss with this movie is, unfortunately, quite sad. I think this film is a lot less silly than Spider-Man 1. I know, I was terrified too. That was one of my favorite things about the original, so I must be pretty disappointed, right? Except I'm actually not, because even though this one definitely has an overall more serious and less campy tone, it's just as funny. The way it manages this is pretty simple. There are a lot more jokes in the traditional sense. You know, moments where the characters say something funny or where we pause for a silly little scene. Normally, I probably wouldn't find these to be an adequate replacement for the first one's overall more comedic tone, but it works because the jokes are really funny. I was surprised at how many times this made me laugh, especially with Jonah Jameson, who has somehow only improved since we last saw him, and that's no small feat. Perhaps even more importantly though, I think the more serious tone suits this story better, because I was truly surprised at some of the themes and ideas tackled here. Right away, there's Doc Ock, a villain a lot of people love, and there's a good reason for that. In a lot of ways, he's quite similar to the Green Goblin. He's a scientist who wants to succeed, conducts a failed experiment that involves his own body in some way, and comes out of it with a sort of split personality. While this could easily end up feeling like a lazy retreading of old ground, it absolutely doesn't, because Doc Ock mirrors Peter exceptionally well. See, in this movie, Peter is really struggling. He can't keep up with his responsibilities, loses his job, is nearly failing his classes, his best friend is distant because he takes pictures of Spider-Man, MJ has moved on and found a new boyfriend, and he lives in a crappy apartment. Basically, in deciding to devote himself to the Spider-Man persona, in deciding to embrace this responsibility, he has only suffered. And most importantly, to me at least, it's not just in a material way. It's that people genuinely have lower opinions of Peter now, viewing him as flaky, unreliable, and just someone you can't count on. Basically, because Spider-Man is so dependable, people view Peter as the exact opposite. And that's where Dr. Octavius comes in, a similarly brilliant person with far more life experience than Peter, and somehow, despite clearly focusing on the greater good, he still has time for his wife, who he loves deeply. In this light, Octavius is this implicit ideal that Peter could one day hope to reach. Maybe he too could strike a balance between doing good for others and having time for fulfillment in his personal life. And of course, this contrast makes it all the more powerful when Octavius's world comes crashing down around him, when he loses the love of his life and his scientific progress in one fell swoop. However, Doc Ock is great beyond the ways he connects to Peter's story. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is here, where the robotic arms are working on their own, attacking the surgeons who are supposed to remove them. The directing shifts in a decidedly freaky direction as the music goes silent and these arms become the monster in a horror movie, piercing straight through people and leaving bodies in their wake. It was a striking moment that sold how terrifying it would be to live with these things attached to your back, and helped me really get into Doc Ock's head. But I wouldn't even say that Doc Ock is the best part of the movie. Nah, to me, that's easily gotta be the way it handles Peter's double life. See, I already mentioned all the ways Peter is suffering here, but there's a lot more to it. There's a real sense of how difficult it would be for him to constantly lie to those around him, even if he is protecting them. Slowly, it starts to feel like those words from the first film, "With great power comes great responsibility," are more of a curse than a gift, and the same goes for these powers themselves. This becomes shockingly explicit when Peter has a sort of vision of Uncle Ben, and a modified version of their conversation in the car replays. On paper, I would expect something this on the nose to feel a little cheesy or over the top, but honestly, it didn't. And that's because I could truly believe that Peter was absolutely at his breaking point by this time, as he's slowly isolated from friends and family more and more, and as his personal life continues to suffer because of this so-called responsibility. This is made even more believable because Peter is also struggling so much mentally that his powers aren't even working properly anymore. He even goes to the doctor to try to get help about it, and the doctor basically just tells him, "Is this really your responsibility?" Moments like these totally sold me on the idea that something here with Peter had to give, that it was either him or Spider-Man. The following montage is a highlight too, where we watch Peter turning his eyes away from bad things after throwing out his costume. Honestly, I'm surprised at how few superhero stories I've seen that tackle this idea at all, and I've definitely never seen one tackle it in a better way than this. That allure of just giving up and letting yourself be normal, lifting away that weight of responsibility and feeling free. It's all here with this montage. But then there's the big scene that follows this. The fire, which harkens back to a disaster in the first film. I absolutely adore this scene where Peter's finally unable to turn his eyes away. But since he's out of practice, since he hasn't made a habit out of being responsible, one person still dies. Here it becomes clear that because Peter has these abilities, he no longer has the luxury of being an innocent bystander. No matter what he does from here on, he's making a choice, and he knows that he is responsible. Another one of my favorite scenes also stems from that sense of responsibility, when Peter finally tells Aunt May what happened the night Uncle Ben died. Now, this was the moment that I realized this movie was giving me almost everything I want from a sequel. Following up on the prior film's ideas, bigger fights and set pieces, and most importantly here, building upon things that I thought we wouldn't even come back to. Like in the first film, that idea that Peter's involvement should come back and affect his relationship with Aunt May was in the back of my mind, but as a sort of, I guess they probably won't address that, there's other things to do. You know, that kind of deal. It just feels like the sort of thing a lesser film would ignore. But nah, this movie includes it, and it's an absolutely heart-wrenching scene. The acting here is top-notch, and I could really feel how hard it was for Peter to admit this to his aunt, and how hard it was for her to hear the truth. Here, Peter's belief that he can leave behind his tough responsibilities and put Spider-Man in the past is challenged by the fact that Uncle Ben's death will always loom over him, that it will always be a source of guilt and pain, and that he might not be able to live with himself if he doesn't try his best to make this right, or at least live by Ben's words. So far, a bunch of the stuff I've discussed has managed to frame a really compelling choice. Our protagonist can either succeed as Peter by disregarding Uncle Ben's advice, or he can succeed as Spider-Man by acting on his words, but not both. In order for one side of his life to thrive, the other must suffer. However, as we continue from here, the film does something interesting. It basically proposes a question. What if these two parts of his life shouldn't be as separate as he thinks? This all comes together when Aunt May talks with Peter about why people need someone like Spider-Man, why people need heroes, and basically why being a hero is worthwhile. To me, as iconic as the "with great power comes great responsibility" scene is, this one is just as important to me and functions just as well. This is Aunt May's big moment, and you get the sense that she might actually know that Peter is Spider-Man, but she's just not saying it. She's just giving him the words he needs, forgiving him, because she wants him to be better and she truly loves him. And all of these scenes are what makes Spider-Man's big fight with Doc Ock on the train so compelling. Of course, this is just a great action set piece, but more than that, there's an emotional core here. When people see Spider-Man without his mask, they still give it back to him in solidarity and promise that they won't tell anyone. Here, Peter and Spider-Man have come together, have become connected, and it hasn't resulted in some sort of horrible disaster. So here, the message seems to be that Peter shouldn't be so worried about being seen as Spider-Man. But then we get the other side of the coin, the bad side, when Harry learns the truth. Here, the message seems to be just the opposite. Spider-Man and Peter Parker must remain separate, or else his life as Peter will surely be ruined, and beyond that, he may even gain new enemies as Spider-Man. It's a powerful contrast from what we just saw, and it can make it hard to tell what we're supposed to take from this. But I mean that in a good way, because this isn't an easy decision to Spider-Man, so it shouldn't be too obvious to the audience what he should do as well. However, then we have Spider-Man's final confrontation with Doc Ock, where he takes off his mask and talks with him, repeating the words the doctor himself said to Peter earlier, along with Aunt May's advice. Because of Peter's words and the connection between them, Doc Ock is able to regain control of himself and save the city. To me, this scene serves as the ultimate showcase of the movie's powerful lesson. If Peter hadn't taken any time to talk with friends and family, if he hadn't lived his life as Peter and instead entirely focused on Spider-Man, if he hadn't taken responsibility as Peter, he wouldn't have gained the knowledge necessary to stop Doc Ock and save the city. This way, Uncle Ben's words are recontextualized. Responsibility doesn't only mean living as Spider-Man. It doesn't mean totally isolating himself from meaningful human interaction. It means just the opposite. Because if he wants to be a hero, it's not enough to just swoop in and save the day. He needs to grow up, meet mentors, and take these life lessons to heart. After watching these two sides of his life essentially battle throughout the film, this is a beautiful moment of connection between them. The moment where it becomes clear that Peter needs Spider-Man, and Spider-Man needs Peter too. Well, that's a lot of good stuff I've had to say about the second movie, and so far, it's a pretty big step up from the original. I mean, I guess I missed the cheesy tone sometimes, but it had plenty of its own story to tell. It took things in a different direction, and honestly, I prefer it that way. But now, it's still time to complain a bit, because I do have a couple problems. The first one is Mary Jane. I had certain moments in the first film where I didn't quite buy her, where I didn't quite believe their relationship, but overall I still thought that it was fine. That changes with this movie, where I don't find Mary Jane convincing at all in a lot of the scenes that are supposed to be the most important for her. Beyond that, just the actual role she takes, her characterization, I don't like her. I don't like her at all, and it's hard to get too invested in a relationship where I don't like one of the parties. And this all comes down to how she treats her fiancé. While I don't blame her for being uncertain about the wishy-washy Peter or having second thoughts and being conflicted, at a point, I just felt bad for this other guy because she's like doing the upside down kiss with him, and it's clear that he's just sort of this Peter Parker surrogate for her. She'll take him, but, you know, he's always the second option. And this is made all the worse when she decides to abandon him at the altar, and it's treated like a victorious moment because our protagonist is doing good, so why shouldn't we be happy? But unfortunately, I couldn't stop thinking about how negatively this reflected on Mary Jane and her decisions, and it made me not really care about the idea of Peter getting to be with her at the end of this film, even though it is the ultimate thematic moment of seeing that he can succeed as Spider-Man and Peter Parker. So that's my biggest problem. My second issue I have with the film is a bit smaller, but it's still there, which is that I just wish that we saw Peter thinking about Doc Ock more. He only really goes after him right at the end, and I was surprised because they had some good scenes connecting with one another, and I thought that he would want to try to help him out, to find him and talk with him and rescue him. I thought that his fate would eat at him a bit more, but it never really did that much. I guess one read of that could be that he decided to give up on being a hero, and maybe that was part of that, but I would have liked for that to be made a bit more explicit. Other than that, though, no problems. I thought this movie was absolutely great. The vast majority of it was a wonderful time, and I still stand by saying that it was a step up from the original film. All this is to say that yes, I think this movie is absolutely as great as we remember and deserving of all the praise it receives. It's a fantastic superhero movie, a great film in general, and I had a wonderful time watching it again for this review, and I actually enjoyed it even more than I remembered enjoying it. But as you'll know, this is not the last of the Sam Raimi movies. We've still got Spider-Man 3 to get to. Unlike these first two, this one doesn't really have a lofty reputation. In fact, a lot of people really don't like it. But we'll take a look at it and see if it really has that many problems, or if maybe it's a bit better than people seem to remember. Either way though, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I encourage you to subscribe. I'm putting out a new video every single day this month, but hey, if you don't want to do that, that's okay too. I just appreciate that you chose to spend some time here today with me. Bye-bye for now.